Today's TEKS is 6.3e, multiplying and dividing positive rational numbers fluently. We'll be focusing on dividing decimals today, and we will be reviewing what it means to multiply and divide by decimals as well. When dividing by decimals, multiply both the divisor and the dividend by the same power of 10. So the divisor is a whole number, and then divide as with whole numbers. All right, we need to be chapter 2, lesson 2. You need to be on page 116 if you aren't already there. So basically multiplying by 10, as you know, is moving the decimals to the right. So if we have 9 tenths, we move it once to the right. We have to make sure we also do the same thing for the dividend. Multiply this by 10, we multiply that by 10. So you end up with the division problem of 17 and 1/10 instead of 1 and 71/100ths, divided by 9 instead of divided by 9/10. Always remember that as soon as you move that decimal, you do need to move it up to the quotient, and then you just basically divide it at that point. I do want to point out that the fact family of 1 and 9/10, which is the quotient, times 9/10 is equal to 1 and 71/100ths. 1 and 71/100ths is smaller than 1 and 9/10. So again, when you multiply by something less than 1, the product will be smaller than the factor. Okay, now we're going to divide 2 and 64/100ths by 6. But first we have to make 6/10ths into a whole number. And we do that by multiplying by what number? We multiply it by 10, which basically means we move it one decimal to the right. We have to do the same thing with the 2 and 64/100ths. So let's go ahead and write that over here. So if we now have 6 getting divided into, once we move this one place over, 2 and 64/100ths becomes 26. And 4/10ths, we're going to immediately put the decimal up here at the top. Okay, so it talks about estimating, and this number here is kind of close to 24. So what times 6 equals 24? And answer that for me, please. Very good. That answer is 4. 4 times 6 is 24. So we're going to subtract that from 26. We get 2, we bring the 4 down, and again, that is 24. So 4 times 4 is 24. 4 times 6. I lost my mind, sorry. And so we end up with the quotient of 4 and 4/10. So 2 and 64/100ths divided by 6/10 is equivalent to 4 and 4/10. Over on page 117, it says zeros in the quotient and the dividend. So line up the numbers by place value as you divide, annex zeros in the quotient. In order to keep the digits in the correct place value, annex the zeros in the dividend and continue dividing after the decimal point. And we've kind of already been doing this as we've been dividing this year. Again, the first thing we're going to do is multiply the 4/10ths by 10. That becomes 4. So then we're going to move, and this is 52. If we put the decimal point there and move it also over one space, we do end up with 520. So you had to annex that 0 to create that 520. And then you just do the regular division as it is shown here. For number 4, determine 9 thousandths divided into 1800ths. As you can see in this picture, we're going to move the decimal twice to make the whole number 18. And if we move the decimal twice, we end up with 90 or 9/10. Put the decimal up here. And now, so if we look at this, we can't subtract 18 from 0, so we put a 0 up here in the quotient. And if we have just plain old 9, we can't subtract 18 from 9, we put a 0 in the quotient. And then finally, 5 times 18 is going to be 90, and so when we subtract 90, we get 0. Now, some of us may be a little confused by this step here. Basically, what they said was 0 times 18 is 0, and they made the 9, subtract the 0 is 9, then they brought the 0 down. That was kind of an unnecessary step, but it makes sense. It's fine. Okay, and finally, let's do this last one together. 11 and 2/10 divided by 7/100. 11 and 2/10 goes inside the division symbol, and then we're going to divide by 7/100. Now, how many places do we need to move this over to become the whole number 7? Answer that for me, please. Very good. The answer is 2. So we're going to rewrite that as being divided by the whole number 7. So we're going to move this twice. And that means that if we have 11 and 20/100, we're also going to move this over twice. So that becomes 1020. The decimal point is now at the very end here. And if we need to, we'll annex zeros. So can 7 go into 1? No. So we'll look over at the number 7. What times 7 can be subtracted from 11? That's right, the answer is 1. So we're going to subtract 11 minus 7, and we get 4. If we bring down the 2, what number, and I'm talking about this place value here, what number times 7 is close to 42? Well, that number is 6, so we're going to subtract 42. Now, this is where some of us make a mistake. We're like, oh, we're done. But don't forget, the decimal point is over here now, and there is nothing there. So we still have to continue by dropping down the 0. What times 7 equals 0? And that is 0. Now we are finished because we've reached this decimal point. So the answer is going to be 160. Okay, I'd like you to try one on your own, and then we'll go over it. Let's take the 5 and 6/10 and divide it by 14/100, or 14,000, excuse me. So the first thing I want you to do is to go ahead and set up the problem, 5 and 6/10, and divide that by 14,000. Go ahead and do that division, please. Don't forget you need to make this into a whole number 14. So how many places do we need to move the decimal over? Answer that for me, please. That's exactly right. We have to move this 3 places. So how many places do we need to move this decimal? Also 3 places. Go ahead and solve that. Okay, you should have created the number 14 from the 14,000ths and the number 5,600 from the 5 and 6/10. Now we've discovered that 4 times 14 is the same as 4 times 10 is 40, 4 times 4 is 16, that's 56. But that's not our answer because our decimal point is way over here now. There are still 2 places here. So we have to actually annex those 2 zeros. 400 times 14 is the same as 5,600. So your answer should have been 14. Don't forget to read through example 6 on page 118 and look at how they solved that. They move the decimal point over, they move it over the same number of times on the dividend, and please look at the process of dividing these numbers. All right, we're about to do some guided practice together in just a little bit. Please make sure that you think about what is something important to remember about dividing decimals. Go ahead and answer that for me, please. Very good, and I will be back with you in just a little bit to do some guided practice.